Great. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for listening in. Yeah, what I'm about to do is give you a story of where we're up to with our latest research. We've published or about to publish a whole new structure for greenhouse gas accounting that's way more consistent than what we've been using. But to start with, I'm giving you a little bit of my background and seeing, so you can see through my eyes what I've seen here. I've called it turning back from the brink, because we are perilously close to problems. So I worked for decades with state government in Australia in the Joint Remote Sensing Program. Our job was to map the vegetation across the state of Queensland, and part of that was mapping deforestation. And also providing information for the graziers, for the beef producers, on climate and what pastures there were. So that program has been going for 35 years now, and you'll see my name on on a lot of the early reports. I was a manager in the end, but we managed to crawl all over Australia. Queensland is on the top right there of the diagram. You might have heard of the Great Barrier Reef. It runs for 2,500 kilometres halfway down the coast of Queensland. So it's a pretty big state. The size of Queensland is equal to the area of Texas plus New Mexico plus Arizona plus California. So we're talking a pretty big area here. And the vegetation that we were looking at deforestation, it ranged from the top right here, sort of open savanna, to rainforest on the bottom right. But the average vegetation, the average forest, was what you see on the left here. It's called an open forest or woodland. But there's still a lot of carbon standing there. And we wore out a four-wheel drive each year, crawling around the countryside. We were doing it with satellite images, of course, but you had to verify them to make sure. And here's a cautionary tale, folks. Never, ever buy a second-hand government vehicle, four-wheel drive particularly. They get a beating. And this is what we were looking for. We were looking for those areas that have been cleared, the deforestation and the regrowth. We're mapping that, and we're mapping grasses as well. We use satellite data, and that 35 years that the project's been going, it's averaged in my state of Queensland. The average deforestation was 2,500 acres per day. So that's 10 square kilometres per day, and 93% of it was for cattle and sheep, and most of it was virgin forest. There's some re-clearing in there as well to stop the forest coming back as it is bursting to do. And this is what we see on our screens. This is in the visible wavelength, so you can have an idea of what we see, but the satellites also see in the near infrared and the middle infrared, so you get a much better picture of vegetation on the satellite screen. You might have heard of false color infrared images. Well, that's what we see, and the machine learning, I guess it was AI, because it was done with algorithms then, was trained to spot the tree clearing to be verified by people. But you can see in these images, the one on the left is the bushland, the forest before clearing, and the one on the right, you can actually see the tracks where the bulldozers have cleared the forest. Okay, so as you may imagine, the farmers weren't too happy with us and our operation, and regularly we would get sort of backlash. They saw us as the tree police, and there was always a simmering argument going on in government over tree clearing and how much government should intervene. See, most of this land, in fact, most of Australia is leasehold. It's Crown land, and it's leased from the government as a pastoral lease or a grazing lease or some other farming. But it's a 99-year lease, and it's expected to be extended. So it's as good as freehold, but it's not quite. But the government always caves into the farmers. In fact, decades ago, back in the 70s, up until the 70s and 80s, the government gave out these leases, insisting that the farmers cleared the land. They called it development. And unless a leasehold was developed, it would be taken away from that farmer. So that's when we saw, particularly after the Second World War, all the returning soldiers, that's when we saw an explosion in tree clearing. And of course, there's a bit of resistance from the farmers. Get out of my face. But here's a video of what it looks like from tree clearing. There's no audio with this, but this gives you an idea of what it looks like. These they have two bulldozers, which are the biggest things they can lay their hands on. A D9 or D11. The D11s are 100-ton bulldozers, and they have a chain strung between them. And the chain, they charge ahead parallel, and the chain is behind them, and it literally rips the trees out of the ground. It's an extremely effective way. And some of these trees, if you have a dozer big enough, some of these trees are 20, 30 meters, 100-foot tall. So, you know, this is industrial scale deforestation. And these methods were invented in Australia. Here's some smaller dozers. You can see that these are D7s, but you can see that prong they have out the front, that metal bar. It's called a tree spike. And what they do is, if they come up against a tree that's a little bit too big, they push into that tree and up, and it literally rips the tree out of the ground, kills the taproot. This is Florida, where they're doing the same thing. That's the chain up close. This is Brazil, where they're doing exactly the same thing. This method of chaining was invented in Australia, but it's now used worldwide because it's just so effective. All you need is two big dozers. Here's a bit of history here. In the early days, they had crawler tractors, and they used this ball in the middle of the chain to lift the chain off the ground to give it more leverage so that it could pull the trees over better. So this is exactly the same. This was done in the 50s. So it literally pulls the trees out of the ground. It's incredibly efficient. And then, of course, if you want to change the land use, if you want to use that land, you've got to burn and burn repeatedly. That farmer you saw just there with a drip torch, that's now still used. They even use drip torches from helicopters now to burn off. But then they rake the trees up into rows, they call them windrows, and they burn again, and then they can plant. Then they stick rake, they call it, and then they can plant crops. But fire is global. There's two types of fire, two main types of fire. The first is deforestation fires. They emit a lot of carbon, but the second is more widespread, and they're savanna fires. That's where they kill off the old pasture growth from the wet season before. The cattle don't like it, so they kill off the old green, the old dead grass, and make room for the new green pick, they call it, to come through, the new shoots. Africa is fire central for the world. Africa burns. This is a satellite image of, you see the dry season on either side of the equator. During the dry season, they burn and they burn and they burn. And the amount of fires in Africa is just staggering. Actually, I'll stop it there just to the about 10 years ago, there was a hiatus where methane emissions in the atmosphere had leveled out, and all the beef pundits were saying, "Oh, this is methane's nothing to worry about. We're not getting any more in the atmosphere. It's stopped. So it's nothing to worry about. Look away." But and they found now that was caused by a dip in the world's pasture fires. That the savanna fires had a few years where they weren't so fierce and widespread, and savanna fires cause a lot of methane emissions as well. By the way, that's not counted in the current conventional accounting, but we've done it. So there's a lot of tricks that have been used we won't go back there. All right. WWF put out a report a couple of years ago that showed the deforestation fronts, and you can see that South America is big. There's deforestation is going rampant there. Africa, it's going rampant. Asia, right through Asia, Indonesia, Malaysia, Papua New Guinea now, and Australia. Yeah, Australia, they haven't stopped. Even though there's organisations that are calling out this deforestation every year, it's still running rampant. So these are 2 10-day composites of the fires during that 10 days, either side of the equator in the dry season. So you can see that Africa, for example, and the sub-Saharan Africa is a dry season up there in the Northern Hemisphere, so that's burning. And then you look at Africa in the opposite season, you can see that the fires are south of the equator. So this is there, south of the equator. So this gives you an idea of how much the world is burning. We don't see it. We live in cities. We never see this stuff, but the world is on fire. And occasionally we see it in the cities with the smoke. Airports have regularly been closed in Southeast Asia because of the deforestation fires in Malaysia and Indonesia. But Russia's experienced it. The Amazon's experienced it as well. And we now know from recent work that agriculture causes between 88 to 99% of deforestation. So agriculture causes about 90% or more of deforestation. There you go. In the past, it's been argued that deforestation is caused because we've got access roads, because we have transport, because we're able to get in there and log. Well, logging does not kill forests. If you log a forest, even clear fell a forest, and leave it alone, it will bounce back as a forest. Within 20, 30, 40 years, it'll be a fully grown forest again. That's why you've got, if you want to change it from a forest to something else like grazing land or soy crop land, what you've got to do is you've got to go through that process that we've seen. You deforest, you take the trees away, and you break the sticks, and you burn and you burn and you burn again till it's all gone, and then you can cultivate it or use it as pasture. So food kills forests. Logging does not kill forests. That's a common misconception. And when wildlife lose their habitat, they don't just move home. You see, the natural world is very self-regulated. Habitat is everything. Food is everything. You might have heard that animals are territorial. Well, that's exactly why, because that's their territory. That's the area that sustains them. So if you take away forest that sustains that community, what happens is they die. They can't just move to the next bit of forest because that's already fully occupied. It's like, no, there's no vacancy signs here. We can't go there. So that's why food is the biggest driver of biodiversity loss. That's exactly what happens. It's all about habitat. In Australia, occasionally we see it in the news. this is an example of some forest that was cleared. They found 250 dead koalas. And now, since then, the koalas have been declared endangered in Australia. In Australia, I can't believe it. And koalas endangered. It's ridiculous. What are we doing to ourselves? So this has been happening, of course, for 10,000 years. And we began with axes, but the serious deforestation, the rate of deforestation increased dramatically when we got mechanized, when we were able to, and what happened was in Australia, other countries as well, they had these creeper crawler tractors, and they decided, okay, this brush, it isn't too big, we'll pull a chain or a log between us and we'll flatten it. And from that extended to bigger machines and bigger chains and killing bigger forests. And then it was developed to the point where this was the globally acceptable industrial scale forest destruction method. What you see of them but it can't be done in all areas. In tropical forests, for example, where you get big timber, you've got to get rid of the big timber first. And so usually that's a one-on-one job where you have a big bulldozer pushing out stumps and pushing over trees, that sort of thing. But they use the same thing, exactly the same thing. They push it out and they burn it. So up until now, we have destroyed 3 trillion trees out of the 6 trillion trees that were in our forests originally. So in other words, we've cut down a lot more than 3 trillion, but right now we've got 3 trillion left from the regrowth and so on. Only about 12% of the forests are untouched. The rest are managed or logged, so only a little bit of the forest is still virgin forest. So as I said before, it's hard to kill a forest. You need to, if you just log a forest and leave it, it will regrow. So if you want land for agriculture, for other things, you've got to do the burning process, and that takes a lot of energy. For example, in Brazil and Indonesia, what they do is they get forestry concessions where they get logging concessions. So they go in there and they take out the timber. Now that provides them with an instant cash flow for them to put the money then into wiping out the rest of it and making it into grazing land or cropland. By the way, people say that palm oil is bad. It's responsible for a lot of deforestation in Indonesia. Well, yes, that's true, but it's only responsible for around 7%, or the latest figures I saw, 10% of global clearing. And perhaps we need to rethink that, because palm oil is by far the most efficient oil producer. If there's canola grown all over the world, and if we replace some of that canola where we can with palms, that would be a much more productive, produce a lot more oil. So palm oil's got a bad name, but it's only responsible for 7 to 10% of deforestation. The main thing is grazing land. So beef is many times more destructive to the environment than palm oil. The thing is, though, that nature is ever ready to bounce back. I don't know if you've ever seen the documentaries on Chernobyl, but you see there that even in a city, even in a built-up area, every crack in the pavement, every little bit of dirt there is will grow vegetation eventually. So, after we as a civilization are gone, you probably won't see much of it because nature just will have overtaken it. But the way we suppress the growth mainly is 2 things. We use fire, as I've discussed, and we also use ruminants. sheep and goats in particular, they're amazing. They will eat anything. I've seen in Australia, in the droughts, I've seen sheep dig up the grass and eat the roots. You know, they just eat everything. Goats, of course, are notorious for eating everything everywhere where they reach. In fact, a lot of the grazing lands in Australia, you see that the lower branches of the trees are just denuded, and above a certain level, above where the cows can reach, it's green. Below that level, it's eaten out, it's gone. But that's how these things stop the forest coming back. Also, the savanna fires that we use, the fire not only burns the old dead grass, it also burns the regrowth saplings. They call it woody weeds, and it takes out the woody weeds. But you can spot regrowth a mile away. If all they do is deforest and leave it, even clear fell it, you see this. You see the regrowth. They're all the same size tree. There's no big trees. There's no old trees in that. There's no little ones coming up halfway up. It's all the same size. And so what happens is that to regain the biodiversity value that it used to have takes takes decades, because you need old trees, you need young trees. It's an ecosystem that's got to rebalance again. But this is regrowth. You can spot it a mile away because they're all the same size. Okay, I left government in disgust, actually, because some of my staff had actually been working on a plan that showed that the Queensland beef industry was carbon neutral, and they justified it by saying that since the fires have reduced, which is questionable, and also since the carbon dioxide fertilization is going on, the trees are getting thicker, so they're storing more carbon dioxide. So the beef industry that uses that land is carbon neutral, and I left in disgust at this. In protest, if you like. When I was describing it to my doctor, my blood pressure was 190 over 110. So he immediately said, "Get out of there." So I did. And so when I left government, you see, when you're a government scientist, you're gagged. You can't say anything. Every media contact has got to be approved by the minister. So when you leave government, it's another thing. So what I did then is I started working on the Beyond Zero Emissions land use plan. Now, this was a really interesting one. It was going to revolutionize land use, and it was going to say how important forests are and so on. And in the end, because of the work I did on looking at emissions from the beef industry, they said it was too hot to handle. And they even changed the name. It was going to be a land use plan, and then they turned it into a land use discussion paper, and they buried it effectively. They never ever promoted it. They had me, one of the co-authors. They had me talk at one university promotion in Sydney, and never again. Which was very funny, but you know, crazy, because then Beyond Zero Emissions went into clean energy, and my plan, the work I did showed that animal agriculture, depending on how you counted methane, it was responsible for either 50% of Australia's emissions or 32% of Australian emissions. So a big chunk of Australian emissions was beef, and they did not want to take on the beef industry, so they buried it. Oh, here we go. So the work we've done recently is raising a few eyebrows. It's correcting all of the inconsistencies and blind spots in the United Nations IPCC greenhouse gas accounting framework. Now, that framework was developed 30 years ago. It was in the late 80s. And at that time, they knew a lot about fossil fuels. They knew that if you burn so much oil, you produce so much carbon dioxide. But deforestation, on the other hand, they knew it produced emissions, but the emissions were highly uncertain. They had no idea how much that sector was emitting. So what they did is they said, okay, we'll put it aside. We'll call it land use. We won't even call it an industry sector. We'll call it land use, and we won't count all the emissions from that. We'll just count the balance of emissions. What's absorbed from what's absorbed. So I'll try to explain what that big difference is. And it turns out we've been doing greenhouse accounting all wrong. See, there's two main sources of carbon dioxide. Everyone knows about fossil fuels, and some people know about deforestation. It causes carbon dioxide. Okay, we're just talking about carbon dioxide now, no other gases. So they're the two main sources of carbon dioxide. And if you ask anyone on the street what's causing global warming, they will say fossil fuels and carbon dioxide. Well, this is interesting because we account for them differently. However, what happens in practice, what happens in the real world is this, that when we burn fossil fuels, most of the carbon dioxide is reabsorbed by existing trees. Some of the carbon dioxide is released into the atmosphere. They call it the airborne fraction. When we do deforestation and burning that goes with that, what we do is release carbon dioxide. Most of it, exactly the same as fossil fuels, most of it goes into growing trees, and some of it goes into the atmosphere. This contributes to the airborne, what they call the airborne fraction. So to the atmosphere and to the trees, every molecule of carbon dioxide is the same, no matter where it came from. It could have come from fossil fuels, it could have come from deforestation. But the process of what happens to those molecules is exactly the same. It's either stays in the atmosphere or most of it is reabsorbed by vegetation. So this is how we count it. This is how the United Nations IPCC greenhouse accounting conventions work. They take fossil fuels, they count all of the carbon dioxide that's emitted by fossil fuels. They take deforestation and other land emission, and they count just 30% of it. So to me, this is the dodgiest accounting I've ever struck. It's not as though we're hiding it between in an offshore account. This is ridiculous. How do we treat the two main sources of carbon dioxide? How do we account for them differently? And the difference is huge. I'll show you that in a minute. But this is what happens. We've been blindfolded. Look, there's hundreds of top-ranking scientists have worked on this, hundreds, and they're all in their silos, in their particular part of climate science. You look at the IPCC reports, and they have hundreds of scientists who are authors. They have hundreds of scientists who are reviewers, who check it. But they've all missed this. The carbon dioxide molecules released by fossil fuels or by deforestation, they don't care where they came from. They're either mostly absorbed by the trees or some goes into the air. So the accounting for this is absolutely wrong. Why this matters It means that deforestation has released 4 times more carbon dioxide than fossil fuels. How about that? How about that? It means that fossil fuels are a minor cause of global warming, and the biggest cause of global warming is deforestation. Who would think? How come hundreds of top scientists got this wrong? I mean, the thinking goes like this. I'll explain it in a different way. The fires that we use for pasture maintenance, the savanna fires that we all around the world, we burn off the old dead grass. Now, when under IPCC rules, they look at that and they say, okay, well, we won't count the carbon dioxide that's released when we burn the grass because next year it's going to regrow. Okay, it's going to soak up as much carbon dioxide as it's releasing. Does that make sense? Probably. And that's why we've been hoodwinked into thinking that because we're not counting the full impact of every bit of carbon dioxide that's being released. We're just counting parts of it, the fossil fuel part and a little bit of the deforestation part. And then we say, okay, well, the atmosphere concentration's going up, and fossil fuels are emitting most of the carbon dioxide, so it must be that. But no, wrong. And this is it. This is one of the diagrams in our paper, yet to be published, yet to be peer reviewed. If you look at, this is cumulative emissions. So it starts at 1750 and it goes up to the present day. So this is how conventional IPCC accounting works. About 750 that the atmospheric carbon dioxide started to increase, right? So we started to see a bit of an increase in CO2 in the atmosphere. And if you look at the emissions from fossil fuels, they look like this, the brown area. Pardon me. So that wedge down at the bottom right corner in brown, that's the cumulative fossil fuel emissions. Now, the green layer on top is the deforestation that's been going for all along. That's the cumulative deforestation emissions, according to United Nations accounting. So let's look at what the real picture is. The real picture is this. The fossil fuels have been well accounted. That's that little brown wedge in the corner here. But if you count the full deforestation emissions, you see that it's way more. In fact, the deforestation has produced at least 4 times fossil fuels since 1750, even when you start here. So this is a true accounting of all of the carbon dioxide, not only the fossil fuels and the net land use, it's all of the land use and all of the fossil fuels. So if you stick this under the nose of the conventional climate scientists, they would be shocked. They're about to be. So deforestation has released 4 times more carbon dioxide than fossil fuels. Interesting. Therefore, industries on former forest land have the greatest climate impact. If we didn't have that industry, we wouldn't have that deforestation. We'd keep the carbon in the trees. But we take away the carbon in the trees, those industries are therefore responsible for that emission. And our figures show that animal agriculture, because of this deforestation mostly, animal agriculture has caused 52% of global warming. Animal agriculture has caused 0.6 of a degree centigrade warming. This is going to raise a few eyebrows. And methane has caused half of current global warming because it's so powerful, because it's so potent. And a lot of climate scientists have been working for years trying to dismiss it, trying to push it down in importance. So here's a couple of graphs from the paper, and it'll be published soon, and you'll all be able to read it. But to a lot of people, these might be a little confusing. So I'll walk through a little bit of what's represented here. This shows the warming for each of these industries: fossil fuels and industry, animal agriculture, other agriculture, forestry, and waste. Okay, now the different colors mean different gases. The pale blue is the impact of carbon dioxide. And you can see that because animal agriculture has caused more deforestation, therefore it has caused more warming than fossil fuels. Okay, so, and the other colors are different gases that they release. Methane I'll talk about, the brownie color here. Fossil fuels have released about a third of the methane currently, and deforestation, fires, and cows, of course, release methane. So that's a big part of the climate impact of animal agriculture as well. But this grey bit down the bottom here, this is really interesting. This is all the co-emitted aerosols. When we burn fossil fuels, we release not only carbon dioxide, we also release sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxides. And this causes cooling. So the warming from CO2, the blue part there, has been more than cancelled out by the cooling from the cooling emissions. So if we go to the graph on the right-hand side, you see that fossil fuels have caused just a small fraction of global warming, and that animal agriculture, fossil fuels, because a lot of the emissions are cooling emissions, not only warming. And animal agriculture has this huge bar of emissions because it's caused so much deforestation. Okay, so you can see here that other agriculture, which is the human foods and the biofuels and the cotton fiber crops, they've caused more emissions than fossil fuels. And forestry has caused almost the same. So this is a revolutionary paper. Now, we've also touched on a new subject, and it's been bubbling away. Salish has talked about it for years, but this is called carbon opportunity cost. And the carbon opportunity cost is this. I'll explain it this way. If you have an investment property, you are a landlord, and you have you own a flat and you rent it out. Okay, that provides you with income. Now, if you own that flat and it sits vacant, that's costing you money. That's costing you real money. That's exactly what's happened with land use. If we clear the land, take away the forest, it's costing us in carbon. If we keep that land as grazing land, every year that we keep that land as grazing land and not its original forest cover means that that's a rental property that's not getting any income. Its potential is to draw down heaps of carbon, but we're preventing that by keeping it as grazing land. So if you include that carbon opportunity cost, animal agriculture becomes responsible for 160 times, sorry, 160% of global warming. What that means is that animal agriculture has the most potential for drawdown. We are now entering the age of drawdown. Everyone's going to be talking about drawdown. All the corporations are going carbon neutral, so they all need some form of drawdown, and the best form of drawdown is trees. So everyone's starting to talk about drawdown. So this is it. This is where we can get so much drawdown, it's going to revolutionize, it's going to transform the world. So fossil fuels have caused just 13% of global warming up until now. Who would have thought? So rewilding, it will solve humanity's two greatest environmental crises. First of all, the sixth mass extinction, where species are going extinct and populations are dropping like ridiculously. And the solution to that is habitat, habitat, habitat. That's all animals care about. Edward Wilson, who died last year, he wrote the book, and there's a big project called the Half Earth Project. If we return enough land to nature, that will stop the extinction crisis in its tracks. We enter the safe zone if we devote half the land to nature, which is what we're talking about here, to turn all the grazing lands back to nature. So the climate crisis, one thing I'd like to say about that, the face of the climate crisis is in these pictures at the bottom here. And it's refugees. At the moment, there's more than 20 million climate refugees per year. Now, we had a crisis when they started to come in, we still have, well, they're starting to come into Europe. But if your home was in drought and drought and drought again, you had no food for your family, you still wouldn't want to leave home. You still wouldn't want to up and get in a tiny boat that could end up drowning you just to get to a place where you can eat. You know, so this is the face of climate crisis. It's refugees. Most of the refugees are within their own continent, but some of them into other continents. And we know that if we reforest enough land, we can stop climate in its tracks. If we rewild the grazing lands, that's 37% of the planet, and we stop deforestation, that will actually reverse global warming. So the sixth mass extinction and the climate crisis solved. And as Joni Mitchell said, don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? So we need a new vision. Vega says the climate disaster is human-made, not cow-made. Edward Wilson says we can share this precious planet. All life can prosper. It would be humanity's greatest achievement. Oren Lyon says nobody owns the woods, but everyone is responsible. So every square foot, every acre of land, every tree, shrub, and grass is precious, is crucial for our survival. And as Salish says, are we collectively desperate enough to contemplate lifestyle changes? That's the question. So for my birthday, I don't know if you can see it, my daughter-in-law had this shirt made, eat plants and plant trees. So that's the message as far as I'm concerned. That's the main message. So that's the end, folks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gerard. You have taken something where I was working with just lower bounds, and you have put some numbers that are greater than the lower bounds. I'm happy. Thank you very much for the work you've done. There was a question from Donna, if you would like to explain that to her. She said, how can anything be greater than 100% of something?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's a bit hard to get your head around. In fact, that's what took me so long to totally understand or to get my head around your work, Salish. And that is that we're treating the potential cost. of having that land as grazing land and not forest. Okay, so it's a potential cost. It's a lost income. It's like having a rental property that's not earning income. If we were to be earning income, if we turn that rental property, that land, back to being productive, being forest, it would actually draw down more than our emissions. Okay, so 60% more is what we're saying. So when we say animal agriculture is responsible for 160% of global warming, it means that it means that the potential is there for not just stopping emissions, but also drawing down past emissions. So 160%, all that means is that it can reverse global warming, not only halt it, it can reverse it.
Right.
Does that explain? I know it's a difficult concept.
I know I've struggled with this as well, explaining this. I think partly it has to do with the fact that we have something called CO2 fertilization that's happening. And the accounting was looking at the CO2 as it was being emitted. And once you reach a higher level of CO2 in the atmosphere, the vegetation has much more potential to sequester that CO2 than it did before, when it was destroyed. So there are several things happening here. The CO2 fertilization factor is like 1.5, 1.6. So, I mean, it means that today, trees can store 60% more CO2 than they used to store 200 years ago. Things like that. Anyway, good question. Tammy?
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Gerard. You're just such a pleasure and such a humble scientist, and we really appreciate your presence in so many of our areas. So we were discussing this when we spoke together on a podcast, and when we were off, you had said, we were talking about meditation and our grandchildren, and you had said that in meditation you see that we're gonna get through, that we're going to awaken and eat plants and plant trees. Would you speak a little bit on that, the hope, but even deeper than hope, that you see in your time between thought forms, a new world?
Yeah, I think it's not only meditation. You can see it in the real world now, and it's actually been happening for a long time. I forget who it was, but someone said that once, the future is here. It's just not very well distributed. So we've had pockets of the future for a very long time, and Climate Healers has been working. And sometimes you feel that nothing's happening, but it's happening. I believe there is a consciousness there that is shifting, and it has shifted a lot. Humans, I look at I've got 6 grandkids now. And when I talk to them, they call you out if you're, dumbing them down, or if you're pulling the wool over their eyes. They know what's truth. They're wise beyond their years. So I have great hope for them. I just hope that by the time we get there, we won't have destroyed the house. But I do feel a sense of optimism, a great sense of optimism. And if you look at the green shoots, if you look at the areas around the world that are changing, it's you can see it fills you with hope, that there is hope. And really, this work, what we've been doing, proves that we don't even need to do a lot to totally resolve the whole lot. If we look at fossil fuels, we've been working at it for decades now, and it's so hard. It's so hard to decarbonize, but that's only a quarter of the problem. The biggest part of the problem is deforestation. So how easy would it be to to pay these people who make a living out of deforestation to do other things. If we put just a fraction of the money that we're putting into decarbonising industry and energy, if we put a fraction of that money into stopping deforestation, it would have 4 times the impact and be a lot cheaper too. So what we're hoping is to reframe this whole thing. Everyone in the world thinks fossil fuels and carbon dioxide are the main problem, but this revolutionizes it. And if we can, it's going to be slow, of course, it's not going to happen overnight, but if that filter, what had happened, if we can get this paper peer reviewed and in a leading journal, it will start people to turn their heads. It will say, no, that's ridiculous. And then they'll look at it again, and then they'll hear someone else talking about it. And then they'll say, well, maybe, yeah, okay, maybe it's true. Because see, our figures have not been available. The way we've done this study has been using a measure called effective radiative forcing, ERF. Now, we and global vegetation models, and those global vegetation models that show the real amount of flux carbon dioxide and the warming from each gas by this effective radiative forcing. We couldn't have done this study just a few years ago. It's only now that we can actually do these numbers and show for sure that this is what's happening. And this is perfect timing. The universe has stepped in again and given us perfect timing to come to our senses. Because I don't think we have long to come to our senses, but given enough motivation, the world can change so quickly. Can you imagine all the emissions from fossil fuels is only a quarter of the amount of deforestation? So if we stop just 4% of deforestation, a quarter of deforestation, we will have effectively decarbonised fossil fuels. Okay, do more than that, repurpose that, rewild that land, and whoosh, we can bring down that carbonisation, that carbon dioxide so quickly. Nature bounces back so quickly. It's undeniable. Chernobyl taught us that. It's going to happen. So yeah, I'm pretty positive about this. I've been, since I left government, I was so totally disillusioned with the government support. We used to have a revolving door. The government scientists would go and work for the Meat and Livestock Australia and then come back and work for us. We were seen as an extension of industry. We were seen as our whole reason for being there was to support industry, and the industry was beef. So, disillusioned by that, got out of there, and I've been sort of beating my head against the wall for a long time, as Salish knows this all too well. But the stars are aligning. The information, the science and the knowledge about the CO2 flux in the biosphere, and also the effective radiative forcing is only now being published, coming out. And so it means that a small-time operator like myself and Salish can actually delve into the literature, delve into the published reports from anywhere. I'm East Coast Australia, but I can get just the same amount of information and data that Salish has, and any climate scientist.
Right.
So the world is changing so rapidly. I could not have done this work. See, when I first did my studies at Queensland University 40-something years ago, to do a study, you had to go into 4 different libraries. I was doing surveying or remote sensing at the time. So to get any of those publications, you had to go into the library where it was stored and subscriptions to publications cost a lot of money, and therefore not every library has them, and also they're huge, so they don't store them. So you had to visit across the campus different libraries, and searching the libraries, knowing what's literature to read was a major chore, because you just weren't able to do that effectively. It's only through computerization, like the stars are aligned. Right now, we're facing the greatest threat we ever had, but right now we've already got to a place where we're able to finally understand what's going on and prove it. Yeah. So these are critical days, and to get back to your question, Tammy, I feel I meditate quite a bit, and I feel that the world is changing rapidly, and the green shoots are everywhere. And there's huge resistance from industry, of course, but you've got to expect that. That's their job. That's what they do. So run with it. I mean, don't get disillusioned. All you got to do is just keep doing what you're doing. At the end of the day, each one of us, that's all we can ever do. We can only do what's in front of us right now. So right. If we keep doing that, the world will change. I'm dead sure of it.
Yeah, I mean, just to echo a little bit about what you said, Gerard, we are all working from the same data sets. And I'm saying as an engineer, the data is telling me this. I'm not interested in conventions. The data is telling me what I'm writing to you, what I'm telling you. So, and exactly what you did now, Gerard. You're just pointing to data that's already existing. Go ahead, Brown and Bineke.
Oh, thank you very much. It was wonderful to hear you, to get such a hopeful sign, and sort of independent of what Sailesh did originally. It's support that work very well, I think. So, but I'm still puzzling why no other scientists supported this work. It's unbelievable, but because the people were very good who work on the IPCC reports. They did their best. But then I guess the politics came in. And they changed all the outcome of what was showing up there. And it's amazing that there must be so much fear of the higher authority, or I don't know, maybe worse, much worse than in the case of pollution by smoke and by lung cancer. This is much more powerful, the agricultural development, and it's so ingrained in everybody. We don't have meat, and they have and dairy. So it's amazing. Like what you say is now it's the time that it can be done. Things can change, but it's sort of at the last opportunity, in a sense, to something happening. So, what is your proposal? How do you want to proceed with this? Is there any proposal you have?
Yeah, thank you, Bram, and look, thank you so much for your help with this paper so far. I know you've read it. Yeah, look, what you said is quite correct. It's scientists are hamstrung by the industry and the support they get. Money talks. So, but once something like this is put out there, other scientists who've been having exactly the same thoughts, I can't believe that no others have thought of this. I'm sure they have, but they just haven't done the numbers. And having me doing the numbers like that will stimulate them into saying, oh, yes, okay, well, okay, it's out there, it's published, I can refer to it, I can reference it now. So, but I think this is different, or I can add to it this way, or no, they'll have a different slant, and that'll start the publications rolling. You see, once we humans think that, and you know this well, once we humans think that an idea is okay, it's acceptable, That's why Salish is having such trouble getting traction, because every time a media outlet goes to look for confirmation of Salish's work, they all say, no, the official government FAO figures are this. And so it's, let's be safe. Let's not reference Salish's work. Let's reference the official Food and Agricultural Organization, which is stacked with industry players. So yeah, that's what's been happening. But I can't believe that these hundreds, and I know them well, some of them, they are very diligent, very well-meaning, very thinking scientists. I can't believe that they would they must have thought of this, but they just haven't published it because they don't want to be the first. But they will. And to answer your question, as you know, we're aiming for publication in a high-ranking journal. So that's how we hope to get this out there. So hopefully before the end of the year, we might have something out there in the published world.
Ray, you'll have the last question.
All right.
You're on. Please unmute.
Hi, Gerard.
Yeah, hi.
Oh, it's an amazing presentation. I saw the Million Vegan Grandmothers presentation, but you've added a lot to it, so it's definitely worth watching both of them. You mentioned just towards the end that we've only recently acquired the ability for climate scientists to properly measure what you need to illustrate. Sorry, my brain screwed up. Is it legitimate for climate scientists to defer the implementation of data into workable solutions by engineers like Dr. Rao? Is that the way the science works? The scientists have, because we seem to see that climate scientists aren't telling us the right things. They are obligated, partially because we have the IPCC, the intergovernmental, a hybrid body that's determining what policies can be made. And we don't need, well, I mean, we do need policies, but we don't need to make policies other than for ourselves and make our decisions. And we've got these scientific methods that are just being channeled through policymakers. So in order for solutions to work, don't we need engineers? And I think that Salish gets a lot of heat because he's not a climate scientist on framed papers on his wall.
Well, that's how things work at JPL, for instance. The scientists do the science and the engineers actually do the implementation. Not policymakers, not politicians. It's only when it comes to our entire planet, suddenly policymakers are doing the implementation as opposed to engineers.
Yeah, we need more engineers looking at this clearheaded.
Absolutely need engineers looking at this. This is how you solve problems. You don't go and ask. I mean, we've gone through that before, right? So we figured out why we need a profession like engineering.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ray. Diane?
I should also point out that...
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I should also point out that the IPCC, they're not the baddies in this.
Yeah.
There's hundreds of top quality scientists, and they produce these big, hefty reports, some of which I've used for this study, a lot of which. But what happens is that it's dumbed down. The IPCC itself is a political body. So they have this, they have summaries, they have summaries for policymakers, and they have technical summaries. And what they do is they take all the great, wonderful, clear science, and then they condense it and put it into language that politicians can understand. And in doing that, they dumb it down dramatically, and they take out any reference to, we must change our diet. Even until recently, they didn't mention fossil fuels. So the IPCC reports, the summaries for policymakers are one thing. They're political documents. You've got to realise that. But the data there and the science document is still good.
Wonderful. So perfect end to our day. So you brought us to the halfway point of week off. So thank you so much, Gerard.